right, welcome everyone to the May Conversation Café. This is a program of MUSC's Sustainability Department. This is still our stay-at-home edition because some of us are still at home. And this program is on plastic pollution in the Low Country. Just wanted to give you a little bit of information about MUSC's sustainability program. Our mission is to build healthy communities by inspiring and implementing solutions to environmental, social, and economic challenges. Some of our initiatives are, saving energy and water. We also work on projects with recycling and transportation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel. I'm the sustainability intern with MUSC. I help a lot with our social media. So we just wanted to let you know that we have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for at musc.edu/gogreen. It's just an email that comes once a month that can help you keep up with events like this in order to sign up. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube as MUSC Go Green. And on those social media, we post different tips and also about events that are coming up, not only ours, but other organizations in the Low Country. And for anyone who's with MUSC, we're also on Yammer, which is the internal platform. You can just look us up at Broadcast Sustainability. So we have these conversation cafes normally once a month, and next month our theme is going to be energy. So stay tuned for more information on that. We're still planning. And now I will introduce our lovely speakers. First, we have Bonnie Ertel, who is a biology graduate researcher at the Citadel. Second, we have Marlo Shedlock, who is the RAP coordinator, Rise Above Plastics at Charleston Surfrider. Third, we have Katie McKain, who's the Director of Sustainability in Charleston City's Resilience Office. And last, we have Alec Cooley, who is the Senior Advisor at Busch Systems, Recycling and Waste Management. So without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Bonnie to share her presentation.
And I actually think I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Christine Von Collins, the Sustainability Manager of MUSC.
All right, and I am Bonnie Ertel. As Rachel mentioned, I am a graduate student at the Citadel. I'm studying my master's in biology, and I work in the lab of Dr. John Weinstein. And I'm excited to talk to you guys today about the sources, pathways, and fate of microplastics in Charleston Harbor. Slide transition. There we go. So microplastics are small plastics, less than 5 millimeters, that have been documented to be ubiquitous in our waterways, our atmosphere, our soil, food, and even in humans ourselves. These particles may vary in size, shape, color, density, polymer type, and their source. But here's some, for example, you can see the size of these particles and how they can vary in their sources. And there's two main types of plastics. First are primary microplastics, which are manufactured for consumer and industrial purposes. So these are intentionally created to be small. For example, beads and cleansers, which are shown here. These have been banned from products after the Microbeads Free Water Act of 2015. However, they're persistent in the marine environment and are going to continue to wash up in our waterways. Other examples may be glitter or pre-production pellets. These, also known as nurdles, are the raw form of plastic that are then melted down to create all the products that we are familiar with in our everyday life. And recently, the Charleston Waterkeeper managed to sue a local plastic pellet producer who had a major release in 2019, and that settlement was for $1 million, but the environmental impact of these pellets is going to continue for years to come. Other types of microplastics are secondary, so they come from the degradation of larger plastic litter. For example, fibers shed from synthetic textiles, which are released through our wastewater treatment plants. Also, fragments and films can come from the breakdown of larger litter. A backyard study done here at the Citadel by just putting these different strips of different types of plastic polymers out on these boards in the marsh environment for up to 32 weeks, which is shown here. But this study showed that plastic surfaces release microplastics in as little as 4 weeks in the marsh environment due to waves, wind, sunlight, etc. Another main source of secondary microplastics is the abrasion of tires on the roadside surface. So I don't know if you have ever really thought about where does the rest of your tire go? Well, approximately 30% wears off over time and releases these microscopic microplastic particles into the environment. So here's some example of these tire wear particles. And here's a very, very zoomed in photo. So I do just want to point out that these are very tiny pieces. This scale is 500 microns. They're even smaller than like eraser shavings. And they have this typical cylindrical shape from the abrasion of tires wearing on the roadside surface. So this is an image using scanning electron microscopy, looking at one of these tire particles, and then zoomed in even further. So this goes to show how these particles contain many different synthetic rubbers and additives such as carbon black and zinc oxide, and they can also pick up roadside contaminants as the wheels go round and round on the roadside. And our lab has estimated that about 1,800 metric tons of these particles are released in Charleston annually. Excuse me. So where do they end up? They end up in our water and sediment. So in Charleston, our laboratory has been investigating the sources, pathway, and fate of microplastics in the harbor, in water, in sediment, and in biota as well. And the majority of what we find in our samples are these tire particles from tire abrasion. We also do find a lot of microplastics that come from the degradation of plastic litter. So again, we're investigating the sources, pathway, and fate of microplastics, particularly tire wear particles. So looking at the pathways, one potential is stormwater ponds. So whenever it rains, our runoff enters stormwater ponds. So we are investigating the potential that these ponds could be sinks for particles in the environment. We also have a project looking at nuisance flooding. So whenever this water from tidal creek networks encroaches on the street during a high tide, particularly like a king tide, which is exacerbated by sea level rise, this nuisance floodwater could be a pathway for particles from the street, such as tire wear particles, into the harbor environment. So that's an ongoing project that we have. And another is investigating the impacts of microplastics in oysters on human health. So this is an NIH-funded project assessing oyster exposure and uptake and depuration of microplastics. And this again is an ongoing research project that we have in our lab. But so far we've found that oysters contain an average of about 20 microplastics per oyster. And about a third of those are tire wear particles. So I'm sorry if I've just ruined your next oyster roast, but I hope I've got you to think about how something like nuisance flooding, which is exacerbated by climate change, may impact what is polluting our waterways, our animals, and even our own bodies. So I would like to thank the people in our lab, previous and past students, and many of them have been students from the College of Charleston. I've really enjoyed this community here of learning about plastics in the Low Country. I would like to thank you guys for listening to me speak and take any questions.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. If you guys have any questions, you can put it in the chat. We have about 5 minutes right now for questions. I actually have one. Is there a way that you can avoid this, like the particles coming off of your tire? Is there any way to avoid that without just not driving?
That's what's difficult because currently, there is no alternative. There have been some devices that are being put on stormwater ponds or stormwater drainage network to try and entrap these particles so that they don't get too far away from the roadside surface. But this is kind of a new issue. Not many other labs are looking this in depth into tire wear particles. They are just beginning to be identified in the literature as a major source of microplastics. They're often either miscategorized or underreported. So it's a new issue. I will say there is a German company who has a device that goes basically on the backside of the tire that sucks up these particles or any other particles that are being emitted. So I think that's an interesting possibility, but the research is still very new in this field.
Interesting. And then one more question for me. Do you eat oysters?
Personally, I do not, but it's more so the texture for me, because as I mentioned, these microplastic particles are everywhere. They've been documented in table salt, in beer, in drinking water, in bottled water. So it is kind of difficult to avoid them no matter what you're eating. But no, I do not like oysters. And working with them in the lab every day, we have a weird relationship.
Makes sense. We have a couple more questions in the chat. First is, do the tire particles float around in the water or do they go to the bottom?
That's a good question. And that's actually a big part of what I'm looking at with the nuisance floodwater, because we did not find elevated numbers of tire particles after flooding in the tidal creeks. So that leads us to think that maybe they could just be floated up by the floodwater and then deposited back onto the street surface. So that's something we're going to be looking into, and that's really driven by the density of these particles, which is affected by the particles that they're picking up on the roadside surface. So that SEM microscopic photo that I showed you, where you can see the individual pieces, we're partnering with a lab at the University of Pennsylvania to analyze those particles for the mineral composition. Then we can figure out the density of the particles, and then that determines whether or not they float. So that's the long answer to a complicated question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Next question is normal rain runoff from road gutters part of the new study?
That's sort of part of the stormwater ponds study. So after a major rain event, we went out and collected samples of the runoff that has collected in the ponds, and we'll be analyzing that very soon. So yes.
Okay, great. And then, are my synthetic fleece jackets worth replacing?
I would encourage you to use whatever you already have, and when it comes time to purchase a new one, to think about buying a natural fibered cotton, wool. So I wouldn't go out and rush to replace it, because I think a big portion of moving forward in like our plastic pollution problem is not just buying all new stuff, but being mindful of what we do have, and then when you replace it, try and do better.
Exactly. Great. And then,
but you can wash it less frequently. That does have an impact. You may not need to wash your jeans or your fleece every time you wear it.
Very true. And I mean, does the temperature of the water have anything to do with like how the particles are released? Like, should you use cold water instead of hot?
Yes, that is true.
Okay, nice. And then Star asks, what about in a fish fillet from Charleston Harbor? Would it have plastics in the flesh?
In the flesh, it's difficult to say. A lot of plastics are found typically in the gut of the animal. That being said, we're finding smaller and smaller plastics, and the smaller the particles, the more likely it is to get incorporated into the body. The thing about oysters that's unique is that you eat the whole thing. You're not going to sit there and like separate out the gills or the non-gill tissues. You just eat the whole thing. So fish is a little bit different of a story, but they certainly can have the additives from these plastics absorbed into their flesh.
Yeah, makes sense. But I guess we can go ahead with our next presenter. Marlo, if you want to share your screen, you can go ahead.
Thank you for having me. My name is Marlo Shedlock, and I volunteer with Surfrider Charleston. I'm the Rise Above Plastics coordinator. And as my slide shows, I've brought you here today to talk about your garbage. I volunteer with Surfrider, so with this group, we are very much a grassroots nonprofit group that is known for doing litter cleanups in neighborhoods, streets, marshes, and beaches. And a few years ago, we started keeping track of kind of what we were collecting during our cleanups. And what we were finding over the years, we were seeing an increase in single-use plastic items that were discarded, again, on our beaches, in our marshes, along our roadways and neighborhoods. And that's probably normal, because if you think about where we are now, going back 20 years, going back 30 years, going back 40 years, just our life has been very much about making it as easy, quick, and simple as possible. And one of those things that makes our lives easy, simple, and just kind of convenient is plastics. I always joke about my age and that I'm so old that I remember back in the day when I would drink out of a milk carton that did not have that little plastic area on it that you pop open and and you pour it into your coffee. We talk about the fact that it's like just a convenience that's completely not needed, and it adds to our ever-growing landfill of plastic. Sir Ryder talks about the fact that a lot of times when people think of plastics, they think, well, I'm buying these plastic items because I need them. And we're being told that we need them from large corporations that are telling us that it's important to have our water in a plastic bottle. But the solution being, well, I recycle. We always hear this. Well, I recycle all my plastic. But unfortunately, recycling is no longer viable for us. With our population of the world increasing from 7 billion to 7.5 to 8 billion people on our planet, and all of us drinking out of a plastic water bottle and using a plastic bag and using plastic toothpicks and plastic ear swabs, when before all these items were non-single-use plastic, we've just created a horrific plastic disaster mess. And what we try to do at Surf Rider Charleston is to give folks options and examples of how they can limit their single-use plastic footprint. I use the word single-use plastic because quite often people will say, well, plastics save lives. We use plastics in hospitals. We've got plastics in our cars and computers and homes. And yes, that's true. But we are all going to live a healthy life and long life if we don't ever use a plastic toothpick again. It's not going to kill us. So what we try to do is talk to folks about limiting their environmental single-use plastic footprint, and that is by it used to be the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. Now it's kind of the 4. With single-use plastics in Surf Rider, what we try to do is give folks the alternative. So instead of using a plastic bag, use a bag that can be used over and over again. So it used to be the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. And now we have the 4 R's, which are refuse. So refuse to take an item that you can only use once. Refuse a plastic fork. If you get an item to go, use your metal forks at home instead of a plastic fork they give you at the store. Instead of asking for your vegetables to be bagged in a plastic bag and then put into another plastic bag, reuse or actually just bring your own bag. We don't have the ability, and this is not just for Charleston, but this is kind of like the whole world, to continue on the path that we're on. We're dumping all of our items into landfills, and our landfill space is gradually going to fill up. And as we all know, it's going to, seep out, or we're going to have coastal flooding. So Surf Rider really tries to instill these things in folks that can make their lives easier and not sort of talk over their heads. I know microplastics, I think, is a great conversation to have with people, but sometimes I will be talking about plastics breaking down and their eyes will glaze over. I think we always look at it as, what can you do in your daily life to make your life easier and more sustainable? So that's my presentation. I don't know if anyone has any questions now or if we want to wait till the end.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If you guys have any questions, you can just put it in the chat. We do have a couple of minutes right now to answer any questions for Marlo. To get us started, I do have one question for you. Can you go more into why is it so important that we need to reduce plastic waste?
Well, like I had mentioned earlier, it used to be that we had the alternative to recycle our plastics, and we don't have that option much anymore. I'm not sure if folks are aware that we used to ship our recyclables off to China to be recycled. That's no longer happening. And again, as I had stated, going back 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when you have a world population that's increasing and these products that are coming onto the market and coming onto the market in such a fast way, single-use items, we just can't keep up. And if you were ever to come out and do a cleanup with Surfrider Charleston or Adopt a Highway, you would notice that the 5 top items that we tend to remove in terms of litter are all plastic based. One of those being cigarette butts as well, but of course those butts are made of a type of plastic rayon. So that's why it's important. It's not going to biodegrade. Once it's there forever. And it's made from petroleum. It's extracted from our sea and just does not go away.
We have one more question in the chat. Christine asks, are you seeing fewer plastics in litter since the Charleston and Mount Pleasant plastic ordinances?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. There was a little bit of glitch, and here's why. During the pandemic, the ordinance was paused for a while. We didn't want to make it inconvenient for businesses to have to go out and pay a little bit more for paper or other items. So that was actually paused. So it's really hard. We have found it a little bit difficult to kind of get a handle on that if we have really seen a reduction. I know that doing cleanups in certain areas, and I would say in Mount Pleasant, I feel like we have seen a reduction. I'm trying to think of our data in plastic bags, but overall in Charleston County, so James Island and downtown Charleston and Folly Beach, we're still seeing unfortunately, like a large number of straws and other items because people have not moved on to following with the ordinance. Some folks are still actually using styrofoam and straws, and they're not using the number 5 plastic cups and yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then regarding your data, Bonnie asks, does your organization report their litter cleanup data to any database like the South Carolina Aquarium? Or
yeah, we share with the South Carolina Aquarium, and we use our data to, of course, give feedback to city and town councils, which is why some councils have, like Isle of Palms, seeing all the cigarette butts being picked up, they have chosen to not have smoking on the beach or at the beach access points. I'm sorry, Folly and Isle of Palms. So yes, we do share our data, and we do also share with our city and town councils.
Perfect. That's really important. Well, thank you so much, Marlo, and we will move on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll move on to our next speaker. So Katie, if you want to share your screen, you can go ahead.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Katie McKain, and I'm the Director of Sustainability for the City of Charleston. Plastic pollution has been a subject we have been focusing on for numerous years, with lots of help from local organizations, specifically Marlo, Surfrider, Charleston Waterkeeper, the Coastal Conservation League. It's been a huge team effort getting to where we are today, so that's really exciting. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this transition and where we are and what our code is. I won't go too much into why we're doing this since Bonnie and Marlo really covered this well, but basically the messages we were sending to people were, that plastics are really, they're trashing our neighborhoods, our waterways, and they're threatening wildlife and posing risks to human health. So after 3 years of talking about this literally and doing lots of community engagement, we did 2 public surveys with businesses and residents. And like I said, with tons of support from the local community, we were actually able to pass a new city code in November of 2018 to start addressing plastic pollution. And you'll note I said start. So the code that we passed applies to the single-use plastics that are not recyclable or compostable. And it passed in 2018, and we gave everyone about a year's grace period. So it actually went into effect on January 1st, 2020, which we know has challenges in itself of 2020. So what the code actually said is anything that the code applies to businesses, not to individuals. And it says any materials used at businesses are given away that are not recyclable or compostable needed to be replaced. So the definition in the code of recyclable was it had to be a product accepted by Charleston County Recycling Program. And this was really a hot topic for us because, some products can be recycled, but if they're not accepted by our local programs, then there's no way for them to be recycled here, right? So we had to make sure that this was an important definition. And I'll be honest, we're still struggling with this one. Compostable, we used the standard industry definition and said that for a product to be considered compostable, it needs to meet those ASTM standards and actually have a commercial composting service that accepts those products. So those were the 2 definitions. So anything that didn't fall under either of these 2 needed to be addressed. So we presented a lot of information. We held workshops for businesses and for residents before this went into effect to help them prepare and transition. You can see on the left here, what's in. Obviously, reusable bags are an easy one. We really tried to push those. Recyclable paper bags are allowed to. And then any, especially for restaurants, food materials that, cardboard or glass, especially paper, those are all acceptable. And then what's out, you can see on the right here. So those single-use carry-out bags are out. All styrofoam was banned. Straws were banned. Stirrers, and all those single-use pieces. There were some exceptions and also just some things that weren't restricted that we included in these because there was confusion. So, for example, the plastic around a bread bag was never banned, but there was concern about it. So we added it in here for clarity. We had posted lots of information. It's actually still up there where you can learn more. It's on our webpage. I'll put the link in there in a moment. Lots of contacts and places where businesses could get more resources. And finally, I just wanted to talk about some of the current challenges with the ordinance the way it is. Obviously, the first and foremost is, this went into effect January 1st, 2020. So we had about 2 months of it being in a particularly normal fashion, and then we started to hit some major supply chain issues in March when COVID hit. So as Marlo mentioned, we actually suspended the ordinance from March 20th, I believe, through the end of June. And that allowed businesses, that chance as they needed to not be addressing this challenge and really focusing on their business during that time of need. The ordinance did go back into effect on July 1st, 2020. So it is in effect right now. So it was only out of effect from March 20th to June 30th. So that has been a challenge, and also in terms of collecting data about it, that has been a challenge. Then also there is a misconception about what is recyclable. So Marlo mentioned this too. So Charleston County is responsible for the recycling program, not the city. And Charleston County has great resources on their website. I'll include that link too if anyone's interested in checking it out. But they have all kinds of visuals about what is recyclable, what's not. And there's a misconception because certain plastic cups are recyclable, but not all plastic cups are recyclable. And you really need to turn them over and look at that PET number on the back of on the bottom of the item and see what the number is. So for example, if it's a plastic cup that says number 6, that means it's made of a certain type of plastic that's actually styrofoam. So even though it's clear and plastic, it's a styrofoam product. That is not recyclable. The county does not accept that. Now, a number 5 plastic cup is polypropylene. That is recyclable. So here's some education pieces that really go along with this. Third challenge here, we've seen some businesses really really take advantage of the opportunity to allow the extra thick plastic bags, and this really allowed the plastic bags. You think of like Trader Joe's, those reusable bags, those are made of plastic, right? So that was the idea of that. So that that is disappointing to see. And you know, we've been looking into some ways we can go back and potentially tweak the ordinance when we are done with COVID, because we don't want to add any more restrictions to businesses or confusion during COVID. But there are some ways we could potentially retweak that section to try to get rid of those extra thick bags. Also, I believe the county would say that they're still seeing contamination in the recycling stream. So whenever you have an increase in compostable products, especially, so I know like I love going to Verde and getting their salads, and it comes in this great compostable container. But if that compostable container is not put in the compost, first of all, it's not being utilized, right? Second of all, it's contaminating the recycling because that compostable, what it's actually made of, will just melt in the recycling facility and then just contaminate everything that's around it. So it's important connection for us to try to make, you know, that if something's, especially a compostable plastic, to make sure that's not getting into our recycling bins. And then finally, I alluded to this also, but we are still, there's not necessarily something in the ordinance that says, okay, now that you're providing recyclable and compostable containers, there's nothing that says you have a bin for your users to actually put them in. So for example, if you go to if you just go to a bar and you know you order something that came in an aluminum can, if there's no recycling bin for you to put that in, or if the wait staff isn't putting that in, then that can is just being thrown away, right? So those are some things that we could consider addressing in the future that are challenges now. And just a couple ways you can help if you want to get involved. So as the presenters before me mentioned, find ways to reduce plastic in your life. So if you already take reusable bags to the store, that's awesome. Look at bringing those reusable produce bags. You know, when you buy broccoli, do you have to buy it in a styrofoam tray that's wrapped in plastic, or can you buy it in bulk? When you buy rice, can you buy that in bulk instead of plastic bags? So there's lots of ways to do that on our website. There's so many ways. I would say start small, start with one thing, and then try to create a habit of that and build those habits over time. I'd also mention that if you see a business that you think might be out of compliance with our city code, this plastic ban, if you feel comfortable talking to the manager of that business, that is the first step, you know, just letting them know, hey, there's this ordinance in place. I'd encourage you to check out the city website, or you can ask them to get in touch with me. That's totally fine. If you don't, or honestly, sometimes it's just easier, you can report it online via our citizen service desk. It's so simple. You don't even have to put your name in. You can report it anonymously. And I'm happy to walk you through that if you would like me to. Like, I'll put that link in the chat to you. Basically, all we do is it creates a work order in our system so we can start tracking who we think is violating. And we send them a letter saying, hey, we heard you might be in violation. If you don't think this is the case, give us a call. If it is the case, can you fix this? And then we start documenting the warning letters. So they certainly don't get a fine right away, but the city has no idea. We're not going out and inspecting every single business in the city. there just isn't staff or resources to do that. So we really depend on y'all to report these. And like I said, it's really easy. So that's all. I really encourage you to help be part of this movement and be part of that community-wide behavioral change. And with that, I will take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We already have some questions in the chat. So the first one is Charleston looking into municipally supported curbside composting programs?
Yeah, great question. So usually the county is responsible for the waste management. So the county does a recycling program and they manage the composting facility at Bees Ferry, which is an award-winning facility. A curbside program would need to be, supported by council, and I really think that needs to start at the county level, and we've had conversations with them about it. I'm not sure that the support is there. There would obviously need to be some type of revenue mechanism that's created to fund that. So that could involve, like a fee or a tax increase that may not be supported by the community. So what I would recommend, I would say the city is looking at ways to pilot some community drop-off sites. There is also a residential curbside program that you can, it's called Compost Now. You can go to their website and check it out. I think it's like $30 a month and they pick it up a couple times a month. That's a great way to get involved curbside if you're interested and don't have a backyard space. If you have a backyard space, really easy and free to do composting in your backyard. But if you are really interested in that curbside piece, I'd highly encourage you to get in touch with Charleston County about it and start talking to your elected officials.
Yeah, thank you. Next question is, what happens to the non-recyclable plastics, like those with the wrong number that get placed in the recycling bins? Are they thrown out? Is there a problem placing those plastics with the recyclable ones?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll try to answer it. Like, I'm not Charleston County, so I don't run the recycling facilities, but in my interactions with them during our plastic workshops, they would say that basically they have staff that have to hand pick out the contaminated products. So I mean, they have seen like hypodermic needles in recycling bins, they've seen hoses, they've seen everything. So a non-recyclable plastic is probably one of their lower concerns, just because it's not as dangerous as some of the things they see, but they have staff that handpick them. So the more our recycling stream is contaminated, the more that strains the Charleston County staffing system.
Yeah,
I believe their newer system in Berkeley County has a few more technological advances that help with that. So that is a good question for the recycling program folks.
Next question, is there any plan to work with Charleston's restaurants to guide them in compostable products purchasing?
We did. We had a whole, that year when the ordinance went into effect and when it was passed, there was a year to help them transition. And we actually went out and got a $35,000 grant and used that to help facilitate business and resident workshops. We gave away tons of reusable bags and straws in the community. We gave away signage to businesses so they could share the information with their constituents. And our business workshops, we actually had expos. We had product manufacturers come and showcase their products, and any businesses that asked me about options, we put them in touch with there's a lot of local folks willing to help out and talk to the restaurant. So if you know anyone that needs some assistance, just have them reach out to me, and I'm happy to try to connect them with someone who could help look at their inventory if they're having any challenges.
Perfect, that's great. And I believe that is all of our questions. Nina was suggesting a pay-as-you-throw program to fund composting. I don't know if that would be something that you guys would do, or if it would be under the county.
Yeah, so I can address that. We actually talked about this a lot in we're just finishing our climate action plan. It's actually going to City Council on May 11th, if you didn't hear, but talked about that and a lot in our waste subcommittee. Basically, the pay-as-you-throw, if you're not familiar, is basically a way of saying pay for your garbage. So the more you throw away, the higher your fee could potentially be. And then that fee increase could potentially help support, recycling and composting programs, which is a great concept. It's something we're looking into. What we need to do first as a city is actually do an inventory of our garbage cans. Believe it or not, there are some residential properties that have like 4 garbage cans and you're only supposed to have 1. And that means that incentivizes people to just throw more stuff away, right? And that's what we don't want. Marlo was saying the 4 R's now: refuse, and stop buying things, stop just throwing things away, because it's easier to buy new things than it is to fix things. We really need to have a paradigm shift there. But something that our city council is supportive of is trying to allocate funding to actually do an audit of the garbage cans around the city. So then we can say, then we could potentially look at a pay-as-you-throw program as part of that would help incentivize recycling and composting, if there's a fee for throwing more things away. So yeah, that is a great idea. Thanks, Nina.
Sure. Awesome. We are a little bit over your time, so we're going to get to the other questions if we have time at the end. So thank you so much for your time and coming today, and we'll go ahead and move on to our next presenter. Alec, you can share your screen.
Hello, everybody. If you can see my slides. So my name is, again, Alec Cooley. I work for a Canadian company that manufactures recycling bins. I'm a consultant, but I also have been heavily involved with the recycling behavior and how do you set up programs for the 25 years of my career. So what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some of these questions. Good. So I'm going to talk a little bit more granular about recycling in general. What's happening? What's being done to address that, and I just want to start by acknowledging what I think we all know, which is that there have definitely been problems with recycling in recent years. There's been a lot of headlines about how it's failing, recycling is dying. Some of those problems are contamination. There's a lot of junk that's showing up into our recycling bins. And what you might have heard about with China rejecting recycling, and it's not just China, but other Asian countries as well, where we sent a lot of our recyclables, they don't want that junk anymore. And so they put up a stop and said, no, we don't want any more. And that's created a lot of turmoil in the recycling markets, which has caused the pricing to go down. And that's had a ripple effect that's also impacted local programs where, Charleston County has not been able to get as much money for its recycling. And so that's had a real problem. I don't need to go into plastics and waterways. Obviously, we've already talked about that. But we've also just even here locally in Charleston, there have been stories in the last year or two about how some of the recycling that was actually being collected by the county was ending up at the landfill in a couple of occasions. And also just in general, the percentage of recycling that's actually recyclable items actually collected has been pretty low. We're not collecting nearly enough of them. So let's dive into what some of the underlying issues are in some of these cases. And first and foremost, plastics are very complex, and that they become very confusing to communicate. And it's not just you, it's everybody. It makes it very difficult because there are different types of resins, and because of how they're manufactured, really has a big impact on whether or not they can be collected. Are they economic to recycle or not? So that's a fundamental issue. Underneath that is the fact that the plastics industry, for the most part, does not think about recycling when they're designing things. It tends to be an afterthought, and that is a big problem. That's how you end up with items like you see here, which the actual material certainly could be reused, but has not been designed in a way that actually would allow it to be recovered. And so what could be recycled is therefore not. And so that's another problem. And then more fundamentally, and this really goes to some of the points that some of the other speakers have been making, recycling has been, it's almost in a sense been scapegoated as part of the problem in recent years. And I want to push back on that and make clear that recycling is not the problem. It's the fact that we have overconsumption, that we have an industry that produces all this material, that recycling was never designed to try and accommodate. It's turning on a fire hose of all this plastic, and the recycling industry simply can't handle all that, and it's not a substitute for other other approaches, reducing what we consume in the first place. And all this, in my mind, really goes back to that lack of accountability with the plastics industry, where they produce this, the packaging companies, they sell it, but then they're not responsible for the cost. That is put onto society, and that's a real fundamental problem that needs to be addressed. So I have friends, I'm active in the Sear Club, and I have friends that come up to me and say, should I even bother putting things in the recycling bin? And emphatically, the answer is yes, absolutely. Recycling is very much a critical part of the solution, but it's not the only solution. And it's not even the first step. As others have said, the first thing we have to do is reduce what we consume. However, to the extent that we are consuming things already, you then have a choice. Do you put it in the landfill, or do you send it into recycling? And the reason that you should be putting that into recycling, assuming that in fact it is a recyclable kind, and we'll come back to that a little bit more in a moment. But the reason why recycling is still critical is because the environmental benefits are on the back end. It's not so much about keeping it out of the landfill. It's about the fact that if you don't recycle that, you then need to make whatever the new item that's going to be made will be made out of virgin plastic. And that consumes far more energy. That requires far more oil drilling and all the negative impacts of that. And so that's why recycling is still critical. The question is, how do we fix recycling? How do we reduce overconsumption and bring that system into more alignment? And that's very complex, more than I can go into in depth right now. But I will point out that even here in South Carolina, there is in fact still demand for that scrap material. It does have places where it's being taken to, where it is being recycled into. Again, there's a lot of turmoil in the commodity markets, more than I can go into. But there have been reactions. Things are improving over how they have been in the last couple of years. And even right here in South Carolina, where there are a lot of manufacturing companies who are making things here locally with recycled bottles, cans of bottles, and other material. There's 25 companies producing jobs all here about recycling plastics. The 13 billion, that's actually related to overall recycling, not just plastics, but manufacturing in South Carolina. Just to show a couple examples of companies here in South Carolina, you have Green Roof Outfitters is upper left-hand side. That's a company right here in Charleston that makes the layering, the plastic layering and all to make green roofs. That's made out of recycled plastic. So that's a concrete example of what you help to make possible when you recycle cans and bottles. Sunoco is another big company locally that makes the containers for the blueberries that you see there. The cars, the plastic inside of cars, that can all be made out of plastic, and it's being done by a company called Wellman here in South Carolina. So without going into depth, I just want to make that point that recycling is still viable. There's lots of things that need to be fixed, but don't lose faith. It's there for a reason. Here locally in Charleston County, there's also been big news recently that got a little bit of headline, but not enough. But there's a brand new facility that just opened up in the last 6 months that replaced a much older, antiquated system for sorting all the material that goes into the blue bins at your curb. So it's an exciting state-of-the-art facility that's going to drastically improve our ability to recycle here in Charleston, so that we don't have a repeat of the program of the problems in past years where stuff had to go to the landfill because it got too contaminated. And actually, if I can pause for just a second with this video or with this deck, I'm going to play a quick video. This was produced by Charleston County showing the new facility. So to bring this back up again, so the takeaway is that what the stuff that you put into your blue bin is in fact going to a facility. It is being recycled and turned into other products. And so oftentimes there's sort of this urban myth that it all gets thrown away. It all goes into the same truck. And I can't, there are instances where that has happened in the past, but it's been localized for very specific reasons, and those are issues that are being addressed with this new facility. So the takeaway is that you should feel confident that the correct items that you put into your blue bin are in fact getting recycled. They are in fact being turned into other items. But it's critical to come back to your role in that each of us has in making sure that what goes into that bin is correct. And again, this gets very confusing. And so, Katie was making a point talking about specific types of numbers of cups that can go in. And there is that level of granular detail for those who really are interested. I encourage you to reach out to Charleston County, and they can answer much more specific questions. But because for most people, it's just getting too confusing to try and think on that level, there are some broad guidelines on just a high level that is, if you're following these, you are pretty much getting it for the most part right. There may be some things that are slipping through, but that's part of what the county's new facility is intended to address. So, for the most part, if it's a plastic bottle, if it's a container that's either for food or something like this clamshell, cups for the most part are fine. The key thing is it's got to be rigid. If it's flexible, like you can see over here on the right side of the screen, there's this Noki package where it's a newer kind of plastic that's not really a bag, but it's also not really a container, rigid. That is not recyclable. Those are the examples of things that need to go in the trash. They cannot accept styrofoam here locally. Bags are very much recyclable, but they cannot go into the blue bin. And that's because of problems with getting through that MRF. It doesn't go through well. So that's something that if you're willing to take it to the local supermarket where they have those drop-off bins, great. If not, then you probably should just put those in the trash as well. And I always come back to this, the saying at the very bottom, if in doubt, throw it out, because that's really where the problem with contamination has been, is kind of this concept of wish cycling, that I hope it gets recycled and it's plastic, so maybe if I put it in there, something good will happen. And that's part of the problem, that we need to change that perception. We really want to get the stuff that we know is going to in fact be recycled and leave out the other items that that we're not clear about. So with that, I will stop and turn it back over for questions.
Great, thank you, Alec. One person said they loved the video, so that was, first time I've seen it too, so that was great. All right, so I'll get right to the questions. Let's see. One person was wondering if there was a list of the 25 companies somewhere online.
Yes, absolutely. If you go to the South Carolina Department of Commerce has an economic development program that works with companies who do recycling manufacturing here in South Carolina. They have a directory that lists every single one of these companies that works here. And if I have time, I can try and look it up and drop the URL into the chat box.
All right. So how clean exactly do containers need to be, like a peanut butter jar, for example? Does it have to be pristine and dry?
Very good question. Because this is another one of those areas where it tends to get a little confusing. It does not need to be perfect. The goal is not so much to make it, clean, plate that you can eat off of. All these are going into an industrial process. It's going to get melted down. It's, so residual things are really not an issue. What you don't want is to have a half empty thing of peanut butter in there, because all that food, it goes rancid. It's all going through that through the MRF, and all those employees have to deal with it. That's really where the problem is. But you don't need to clean out every single jar and drain it out, as long as you're getting out the bulk of that food waste out of there.
And Rachel, I guess Marlo had a tip to buy peanut butter in a glass jar versus plastic, because you could run it through your dishwasher. So I had another question about recycling facilities. So, you know, we are having all the issues with Asia, and they're not taking recyclables from the United States any longer. So are other companies opening up to take the recycling? How are the markets doing? Are there markets in the United States now, for example?
That's also a great question. I can take that first. Yes. So one of the things that's happened since 2018, when China announced we're no longer going to accept recyclables, there's a lot of nuance to that. They actually have continued to take a lot of our recyclables, but they're just dramatically reducing the percentage that they take. Some of that material that used to go to China is now going to other countries like India and Vietnam, which, it's not that those are perfect either. There are problems there as well. But one of the silver linings is that it is causing a lot of recyclables to now stay in the United States and get processed here. And including here in South Carolina, I know of at least 2 new facilities that opened up just in reaction to that. They're actually owned by Chinese companies, but they open up facilities here, and they are cleaning the plastic and then processing it into to a flake that can be used to manufacture other things. And so it's actually brought some jobs back to South Carolina.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. I did hear about a paper company opening up, and it was a Chinese company, and they're adding more facilities.
And actually, I can just drop in a quick other related item, which most people don't know about, but there's but you can now recycle cartons, like milk cartons, and those. Traditionally, those could not be put in, but there's a new facility that's opening up in South Carolina that can take those. So in Charleston County, you can now put paper cartons, soy milk, aseptic packaging, that can now go into your blue bin.
Yeah, great. Glad you remembered that.
And if I could say one other thing, I just put in the link into the chat box that goes to the Department of Commerce's website, where you can find a listing of every one of these companies that recycles plastics or any material in South Carolina.
And the Chinese company that I was referring to is called Nine Dragons. It's one of the richest companies in the world, as a matter of fact, and it got rich off recycling. Yeah. So I don't see any other questions. Are there any questions for any of the speakers?
I see one more in the chat.
Okay.
Is plastic wrap on fresh foods recyclable if it's returned to the grocery store? So like the wrap and not the bag, I guess.
That is not the case. And this starts really getting into that rabbit hole of very specific items of what can and can't. But in general, what can go to the store is going to be bags. So the shopping bag, plastic is okay. A bread bag is okay. Even the bags that come in a cereal box, those are all the same kind of, it's an HDPE type of plastic. So those are fine. But things like saran wrap that are a little bit different, or the wrappings that come off of if you open up a container, for the most part, they are not. And to avoid getting even more confused, I'll just leave it at that. Those should just go in the trash.
Very good. Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions, and we are out of time. So I really want to thank Bonnie and Marlo and Katie and Alec and Rachel, everyone, for your time today. Fabulous presentations. I learned a lot, and I know everyone else did. And this meeting it has been recorded, and we will have it on our YouTube channel, and that is the MUSC Sustainability YouTube channel. All of our past programs are on that channel for you to go and see on a range of topics of sustainability. And next month, again, we're going to be talking about energy. So we look forward to seeing all of you then. So thank you, everyone.